Welcome back to 2024 elections. I'm in conversation with Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane. Mmusi, in your final election rally over the weekend, you referenced the late Nelson Mandela in that he would have looked at Build One South Africa as his preferred party. And you mentioned, of course, that the leadership within the current ruling party is old and that maybe it's supposedly out of touch with the current challenges within the country. Now, you are a young leader, you are in your 40s. How important is it that the leadership that we have in this country can talk to the needs of the people on the street?
Yeah, look, I say Nelson Mandela would have voted for Bossa because I think Nelson Mandela was the first one to build one South Africa. And therefore, we take cue from that leadership that says, can we continue the legacy of building one South Africa? I don't think President Mandela would have voted for corruption or racial divisions. I really don't believe that. And so it would be an antithesis to what President Mandela stood for. So I don't think he would be enamored with voting for corrupt ANC. Certainly not. But to your question at large, which I think this is what we are working towards when we go into the levels of corruption within the ANC leadership at the moment are quite disturbing. You know, from the president on, where you look at Phala Phala, you look at the issues around the deputy president, you look at the number of people who have been implicated in the Zondo Commission, you can't sustain that. That's why at Build One South Africa, we went out and said, can we find ethical leadership that come from communities that are accountable to the people? And let's bring them together, united by a vision to ensure that we can deliver a South Africa that prospers for everybody. That's been our principal focus. And that's why, to me, when we look at even our message at the closing rally, here's a party that started. And I'm saying to the people of this country, this is not a contestation between big versus small. It's a contestation between old versus new. So ANC leadership is aging. It is incapable of understanding future dynamics, whether it's climate. You and I are discussing on a platform. People talk about AI. These are issues of the future, yet you've got, with respect, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds still running for leadership in this country. What craziness is that? That we, I mean, others would say, but America is going through the same. The only difference here is that America has got institutionalized capacity that is strong, which means the leadership is less significant. Whether Americans, whoever they elect as president, the institutions will matter. In South Africa, our institutions have been so weakened that to elect an 80-year-old means the pace of government will always be dictated to by the 80-year-old. So we'll never be able to talk about digitization, AI, education that is blended, talk about future economies, talk about capital flow and making sure that there's a savings rate in this country, but an investment thesis that makes sure that we can put money in South Africa. That's never going to happen. So I find it anomalous that we are discussing 70 and 80-year-olds leading our country. I think it would do a disservice in a country where the average age in the continent is 23. Really, we shouldn't be led by 70-year-olds. And I'm not trying to be ageist. I'm just merely reflecting on the current realities we face up to.
Mmusi, what are the expectations of Boza heading into this elections?
We're going to be the king.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. From a national and a provincial level, I know you're trying to establish quite a strong foothold within the Gauteng province. But I mean, when you look at your manifesto, when you've spoken, of course, with your party members, what is it that Build One South Africa wants to achieve in this elections, and of course, then building on for the local government elections in 2026 and ultimately the next national elections in 2029?
We have to get representation in all 9 provinces. That's the first job that we've got to do. The second one is to get a significant amount of seats in the National Assembly to become the anchor government, or at least the anchor tenant in a government of the grand coalition of the opposition. And thirdly, we are building infrastructure that, I don't know if you follow football, but
of course I do, yes.
But in football, we talk about playing for Champions League, which means the top 4 teams play Champions League. That's what we're playing for.
All right.
That's our ambition. We don't want to be fifth or sixth or seventh or whatever. We want to play for the top 4 slots. So let it be the ANC, the DA, the EFF, and us, and then we discuss the future of this country.
You're not a Manchester United fan, am I right, Mr. Mmusi?
No, I like to play Champions League football.
Okay, because they're one of the teams that are not in the Champions League.
They will never. They can't. Natural.
Yeah, just to throw something light in there, Mmusi. Mmusi, coalition government, it's going to be quite big. If Boza is going to be playing quite a significant role in the coalition governments, be it national or provincial, what are the T's and C's with regards to your party's criteria?
The 10-point plan is fundamental to that. We talk about, how do we provide universal health care? I don't think NHI will do that. Along with the issues of education, energy, ensuring that ultimately there's safety, ensuring that so that we eradicate corruption and appointment of ethical leaders. That's articulated in our 10-point plan, which already will exclude certain people. You will exclude anyone who's corrupt. You can't coalesce with lawbreakers and say you are going to make laws that arrest corruption. Can't be natural. So it excludes the ANC because they have been at the forefront of corruption. The Zondo Commission says so. The president said when he arrived at the Zondo Commission that they stand as accused number 1. So it's not me saying it, they've said it. But second, and alongside this issue, is about ensuring that we can't build with parties that are racist in approach or divisive in approach. We need to build with parties that are inclusive. So for us, that's a key condition. We are not going to sit here and say we'll pick this one or that one, because the last thing we need in this country is to be able to form a coalition that governs West and the ANC. That's the people of South Africa will never forgive us. We have to build coherent. Therefore, these things become important, that you have a plan, you've got values, and you've got deliverables. I think the president should stop coming to give us grand speeches about Tenswalo and whatever. They must come and say, on the 10-point plan, we said there'll be no load shedding after 2 years. This is how far we are. We will keep the lights on. We said we'll reform Transnet. This is where we are. So we keep that discussion. That's how when Joburg, we held Herman Mashaba to be the mayor from 2016 to 2019 when I was leader of the opposition. We were able to keep that going because we delivered a plan quarterly. We were quarterly. I had to force him to say, you will give me this report. I had to bring leaders of parties. We'd stand before the people and said, we said we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is what we've done. And people can hold us to account. National government is the same. So appointing the most ethical leaders, keeping a vision on the table, and then delivering on the outcomes for the people is the way we can only go forward.
Mmusi, you said earlier on, you don't shy away from difficult conversations. And I know you're a leader that doesn't shy away from difficult conversations. I think you know where we're going to from here. We see what's currently happening in Gaza, in Palestine. Close to 36,000 people have been killed. And we saw just on Friday the ICJ ruling with them again ordering Israel to stop what they're doing right now in Gaza. I know Build One South Africa a couple of months ago said that they are calling for an immediate ceasefire. UN resolutions have been passed. Unfortunately, nothing has happened. Just yesterday, we saw in a humanitarian zone, bombs being dropped. I saw pictures of babies' heads being taken out. It was absolutely disturbing. You said you've disagreed on the Democratic Alliance on a number of matters, and the Democratic Alliance still today, yes, they call for two-state solutions, but they've not really addressed the situation hard on. What does Mmusi Maimane and Build One South Africa have to say about this, given that there's a large representative, you said it, there's Muslim candidates within Build One South Africa. What does Boza have to say with regards to this right now, given that there is a huge Muslim, even though it's minority, it's quite a big Muslim presence that's going to be coming at the polling stations?
Look, one of the things that we've got to recognize is we cannot continue the violence and the suffering that is going on at the moment. We cannot. We have to, with the international community, that includes a partnership, particularly with the UAE, the Arab League, to simply ensure that there's a ceasing of violence in the region. That is a collective international position on this issue. Second to that issue is the fact that the pathway is, I cannot, having been to both sides, I cannot waver away from the sense of going, a two-state solution still remains a pathway towards a resolving of the situation. Because at one level, ceasing of violence, returning of hostages, cannot just be also just the end of the issue. A two-state solution still remains. And I think that is a position that certainly the Arab League, the South African foreign policy position states, that's our foreign policy. And I think we must uphold international law. That's why the ruling that takes place both in ICJ and many must be applicable. So I continue along that path, and none of us, I really am deeply understanding and certainly don't want to see more suffering, and the scenes you are describing need to come to an end, because I think we can't continue in this violent manner. It simply is. It's simply not going to be in a way that I think the international community can stand by and observe.
One final question, Mmusi. Given that, what do you say to the Muslim voter that carries this in their heads and saying, okay, I want to vote for Build One South Africa, but there's a contention with regards to, whether they have solidarity for Palestine or not. So what is your message to them as a parting word there, Mmusi?
Yeah, I think that my message to them is simply this, and is that in a time of great difficulty, it's at that time that you continue to hold your principles. And for Muslim voters who stand with us on the issue of a two-state solution, who stand with us on the ceasing of violence, who stand with us in the understanding that actually the atrocities that have been committed need to come to an end, and that the broader community that sits in the region must work collectively to ensure that we resolve this issue. I think for that Muslim voter, I need to stand with them, because they understand that ultimately a leader who gets up, and I've been, as I say to you, on both sides. I've been to Ramallah, I've been to Jerusalem, I've been to various aspects, met with both governments, insisted even with Benjamin Netanyahu, where I said to him, this cannot continue. That was way before this whole matter began, and he simply was dismissive of the issue. In a global climate, you have to have leaders that are willing to stick to principle and lead going forward. And the South African foreign policy position holds up to the same. And so what I'm saying is, let's endorse it. Let us stand together in a time like this, because tomorrow there will be a conflict everywhere else. Let's not listen to hypocrites who say that about this issue, but then tomorrow are willing to endorse someone else who's committing violence in another place, departing away from our position. It is important that we stand together in this issue. And I think ultimately, I want to say this to particularly Muslim South Africans, because as a Christian, there's a genuine temptation sometimes to say you have to be Muslim to represent Muslims. And I say to them, you have to be a constitutionalist and a lover of human rights to represent all the people. Because the mistake we could make is when we suddenly think to ourselves, only those who look like me can represent me. And then I think we've got a danger in society, because then we might as well just look at the census forms and say, there are so many Muslims, therefore they must vote for this Muslim party. There are so many Christians, therefore they must vote for this Christian party, etc. That stops us from really engaging in the substance of the issues. And I think these issues are being well ventilated, and certainly with our counterparts globally, I've spent quite a bit of time engaging them and engaging Muslim South Africans to say, what is your position here that sits at the center? Sure, there'll be extremes on either end. There are those who are on the extreme end of this. And I think at the time, as tough as it is, you've got to remain holding the center, because when all of this comes to an end, we have a nation, we have a society to build. And I want to say this, I actually feel to say it even now. I believe in a God, even as a Christian, who loves both Israelis and Palestinians. And I think there's a deep pain that we all feel when we see violence.
Mmusi, unfortunately, time is up. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal TV, and all the best ahead of the elections.
Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. That's Mmusi Maimane, the Build One South Africa leader. Well, that's all we have for you here on 2024 elections. Tomorrow, of course, our last episode of the interviews. And then, of course, on Wednesday, we come to you live from the ROC. From myself, Hospital, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to 2024 elections, my vote, my choice. Yes, we are just 2 episodes away from that penultimate day on the 29th of May. And of course, looking ahead to the results, which us at Hilaal TV will be coming to you live from the ROC. Now, today's political party that we are going to be discussing is Build One South Africa. It's, of course, one of the new parties entering into the ballot box. And I'd like to welcome its leader, Mmusi Maimane. Mmusi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on 2024 elections on Hilaal TV.
Good evening, and it is my very great privilege to be here. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. No, it's an absolute pleasure hosting you. Mmusi, let's start off, of course, with the book that you wrote, published last week, Dare to Believe Why I Could Not Stay in the DA. And I know there's a lot of things we're going to be discussing with regards to this, and we're going to try and cram it in the 24 minutes. But I read the book, and I supposedly got an understanding of just how the toxicity was there within yourself in the DA, and just why you could not be part of that party. You were seen as the poster boy for the Democratic Alliance in having the black leadership within that party, yourself, Herman Mashaba, Bongani Boloyi, and so forth and so on. When was the tipping point for you where you said enough is enough?
I think more than anything, you realize that you go in to serve and to build one South Africa, right? You realize more than anything that, as I write in the book, the horror of September, when things start no longer being about principle, but people feel to make it personal. When the attacks become to such a point where your family is at risk, your health is at risk, and you realize more crucially that this is not an organization that is interested in the well-being of all South Africans. It is interested in the well-being of some South Africans, a minority South Africans, and more specifically white South Africans. You then say to yourself, you can't, if you have a vision deeply held that says you must build a South Africa that works for everybody, that you will stay inside that organization. And so part of the tipping point was obviously, in some ways, the election of Helen Zille, in other places, the sense of knowing that this organization, I'm going to spend the next number of years fighting to recruit Afrikaans voters rather than simply the notion of building all South Africans, of which Afrikaans South Africans are some of them, but it's not for all of them. It can't be just for that. It has to be for everybody. And so you feel that history will record that not only was it personal, but history must record the fact that this became an organization that's got minority interests. And you can see it in how it governs, you can see it in its leadership, and you can see it ultimately that this became a fight where we could not really remain in there.
Mmusi, yesterday the DA held its final election rally just around the corner from where I live, in Wallamore Park in Benoni, and I saw a majority of black supporters coming there. There was mostly black supporters that were there. Does the leadership of the DA right now, as it stands, and given what your book has said, can they still resonate with the majority of South Africans? And I asked that question because I saw the supporters that came there. So, can they still resonate with it? Because this is quite a key elections for them as a party.
Yeah, I think part of the dilemma that the DA faces is that it's a party that sees black South Africans when it comes to an electoral machine, but doesn't see black South Africans as it comes to their aspirations and the hopes they hold. Keep in mind, that part of the hope that many Black South Africans live in is that this will be a country that reflects them. Not them only, but all South Africans. That in the leadership, there must be a diversity of people. That in the parliamentary lists, it'll reflect them. Now, when you look at the DA's list, fine, at the rally, there'll be many Black South Africans, but in parliament, there will not be the majority. How is that asymmetry working itself out? But, that's why many of us, and I'm not anxious about this, I think that we've got to go out of our way to build one South Africa. We've got to go out of our way to say our future is one where we must build parties that don't represent particular races, but represent all South Africans. And you must deal with complexity. I conclude in the book that actually, if you want to lead South Africa, you must have a deep appreciation for what is complex. South Africa is a country where it's not black versus white, it's black and white. It's not Indian versus colored, it's black, white, Indian, and colored together. It's not about rich versus poor, it's about an economy that works for both. It's not just about urban, rural. You've got to be able to work with both those dynamics. And if you fail to do that, the lazy parties simply say, I choose blacks, or I choose whites, or I choose rich or poor, or I choose this faith or that faith. That's not my interest. My interest has always been that together we can prosper. And that's what my life's mission is always. So I can't stay in a space that doesn't aspire to. That's why we've built a whole political party with candidates that come from various parts of South Africa. We've got Muslim candidates, we've got Jewish candidates, we've got Black South Africans, white South Africans, we've got urban, we've got rural. That is the politics of this country. And yes, it's going to have contradiction and sometimes difficult conversations. But boy, we have to win that battle, for if we fail, you will end up with a South Africa where there's an enclave of wealth and a sea of poverty.
Mmusi, a lot of your discussion of Build One South Africa is about jobs and trying to curb the unemployment rate. As it stands, 32.9%, and that may be that number may be also inflated. And amongst the 32.9%, a vast majority of it is youth unemployment. Now, many political parties have said that they've got a plan for jobs. They know what they're going to do. Now, granted, Build One South Africa is a new political party, and there has to be some sort of chance given to a party like yourself. But how does Build One South Africa say, all right, if Mmusi Maimane comes into the union buildings, this is the plan? How do we address the unemployment issue, and how does Build One South Africa address the unemployment issue, given that this country really is in a crisis with regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've tabled a 10-point plan, but the easiest way I can explain it to people is that the economy is a bit like a garden. In a garden, you have to have the right conditions for plants to grow in, and you have to have the right plants that grow in that garden, right? So let's look at the conditions first, which is typically espoused in economics as your fiscal policy in where you dispense the resources. Number one in principle about that issue is that you have to ensure the lights to stay on. And we've got a plan for Eskom that ensures that we introduce SMRs and stabilize the grid to a point that we never have to talk about load shedding. If you kept the lights on in South Africa, that would deliver an additional 1% GDP growth, just naturally, because investment will begin to flow into that space. We'll be able to transition not only from fossil fuel, but from renewable energy. That creates another whole economy that stimulates the issue. And then you'll partner with the SADC region to ensure that you can maximize the use of gas, hydro, and coupled with wind. So these are important dynamics. That's about Eskom. The second issue is about dealing with logistics. That's about Transnet, making sure our ports are effective. That's about goods moving in and out of the country, but also it's about passengers being able to move through rail from their place of home to their place of work, because South Africans are spending, in some instances, over 40% of their income just getting to work. But if you fix the rail infrastructure and transport mobility, you can ensure economic hubs develop around each of those train stations. That's just part of the economy that we are trying to build. Thirdly, you have to build broadband infrastructure. That's about digitizing communities, particularly township townships. If you don't introduce some form of digital infrastructure, you can't run BPO centers in those townships. You can't move goods in and out. We don't need a township only in the economy. We need a township from the economy, an economy from the township. So ultimately, you can ensure that actually people can manufacture things in townships and export them out. Fourthly, you've got to educate our kids. Skilling for the economy is a fundamental issue. Therefore, when our kids are passing at 30%, they are not going to succeed. We've got to move them from 30 to 50%. And so when we achieve that, we can ensure that at 50%, you've got a skilled economy, you've got young people who can contribute. Lastly, let's keep our communities safe. No one is going to invest in a dangerous climate. When the murder rate is at 75 people per day, that is worse than a country at war with itself. So let's ensure that we keep devolved policing, make sure that there's intelligence lower down the ground, and then we can create an environment and a climate where ultimately investment is possible. To the plant analogy, what do you put in there? We've proposed a Jobs and Justice Fund that is designed to fund SMMEs so that we can stimulate those. We've spoken about a 220 billion rands investment that can go into particularly the township economy. This is about making sure that manufacturing of two particular items. Let's use, for example, you and I both use kettles and a microwave. And the tragedy behind those two items is that South Africa only manufactures 4% of them. So we've got to do that. But also in the manufacturing of using the SADC infrastructure, when you transition from fossil to sustainable energy, you can use the minerals such as palladium and what you use in battery technology. We can build it here and create a new economy that's export orientated. Thirdly, is that we've got to introduce what is called a national civilian service, where young people can work for 6 months and ensure that we give them internship program for another 6 months. And then lastly, I'm always committed to the fact that along with government expanded public works programs, to increase the number of security, you give young people an opportunity to work within that space. You also introduce infrastructure build where people from their communities will come through. We've calculated that if we want to put a job in every home, that's an additional 2 million jobs in the next 5 years, a GDP growth of at least 5%, and we can ensure that ultimately South Africa is on its way towards prosperity. It's going to be a long journey. The depth of people who are unemployed is a long line. In fact, most people will tell you that if we keep the same government, if you were to line up the people who are unemployed, it will start in Cape Town, it will finish in Cairo. So we have to begin to change that picture.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane. Do stay tuned to 2024 elections.